My husband's mistress sent me a text at 11:47 p.m. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a confession. It was a paragraph dripping with pity, telling me I was pathetic for holding on to a man who didn't love me anymore. She called me small. She called me desperate. What she didn't know was that the company where she worked, where she met my husband, where she built her entire little fantasy, belonged to me. Before I tell you how I dismantled everything she thought she knew, hit like and comment where you're watching from. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were messing with, I need to hear your story. My name is Claire, and I was 38 when I learned that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. On the surface, my marriage looked stable. We had a home in a neighborhood where people knew each other's names. We attended dinners, smiled in photos, celebrated anniversaries with the kind of ease that comes from years of practice. My husband, Daniel, worked in sales at a mid-sized tech firm. He was good at his job, charming, confident, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they mattered. What most people didn't know was that I owned that company, not partially, not through inheritance or a silent partnership. I built it from the ground up 15 years ago when I was barely out of college with nothing but a business plan and a loan I signed for a loan. By the time Daniel and I met, the company was already profitable. I didn't hide it from him, but I didn't advertise it either. Success, I learned early, changed how people saw you, and not always for the better. Daniel loved that I was driven. He just didn't love talking about the details. Over time, my role became something we didn't discuss at dinners or introduce at parties. He'd say he worked in tech. People assumed we were both employees, maybe that he was the ambitious one. I never corrected them. It didn't seem important then. What mattered was that we worked. Or so I thought. The first crack appeared 6 months ago. Small things. He started working late more often, his phone face down on the counter, sudden business trips that didn't quite line up with the schedule I knew by heart. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse. I watched. I'm good at patterns. It's how I built a company, and the pattern here was obvious. Her name was Jessica. She worked in his department, hired 8 months earlier. Young, ambitious, the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. I'd seen her file during routine HR reviews. Solid performance, no red flags. I didn't think much of it then. I didn't know she'd decided my husband was part of her upward trajectory. The night she texted me, I was in bed, reading a report I'd been putting off. Daniel was in the guest room. We'd been sleeping separately for 2 weeks. He said he had insomnia, that he didn't want to disturb me. I didn't argue. The text came from an unknown number, but she introduced herself immediately. No hesitation. No shame. She told me Daniel had been unhappy for a long time. That I was holding him back. That he deserved someone who understood him, someone young enough to keep up. She said he'd told her everything about me, how controlling I was, how cold, how I made him feel small. Then came the part that stuck. You're pathetic for thinking he'll stay. Let him go, you're embarrassing yourself. I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. My chest felt tight, not with sadness, but with something sharper, clarity. Because in that moment, I realized 2 things. First, Daniel had painted me as the villain in a story I didn't even know I was part of. Second, Jessica had no idea who she was talking to. She thought I was just a wife, someone soft, someone who'd crumble under the weight of her words and step aside. She didn't know that every paycheck she'd ever received came from an account I controlled. She didn't know that the promotion she was angling for required my signature. She didn't know that while she was texting me in the dark, I had access to everything: emails, records, performance reviews, communication logs. I didn't respond to her message. Not that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and started reading. Every email Daniel had sent from his work account. Every message she'd sent from hers. Company policy was clear. All communications on company devices were subject to review. They'd been sloppy, careless, confident that no one was watching. There were messages during work hours, meetings that never happened, expense reports for dinners I now understood weren't client-related. They thought they were clever. They thought they were invisible. They were neither. By the time the sun came up, I had a file. Clean, organized, undeniable. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I got dressed, made coffee, and prepared for the day ahead. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. And neither of them had any idea what was coming. I didn't confront Daniel that morning. I didn't ask questions I already had answers to. I poured his coffee the way he liked it, set it on the counter, and left for work before he came downstairs. The drive was quiet. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the engine and the weight of what I was about to do settling into my bones. When I arrived at the office, everything looked the same. The lobby still smelled like expensive coffee and clean floors. Employees nodded as I passed, the same polite greetings I'd heard 1,000 times. No one knew what I knew. No one could see the folder sitting in my bag, the one that would change at least 2 lives by the end of the day. I went straight to my office and closed the door. My assistant knew not to disturb me when I did that. I opened my laptop and pulled up the company handbook, the section on workplace conduct, fraternization policies, misuse of company resources. I'd written most of it myself years ago, back when the company was small and every decision felt permanent. I never thought I'd be using it like this. The policies were clear. Relationships between employees had to be disclosed to HR. Company resources couldn't be used for personal matters. Falsifying expense reports was grounds for immediate termination. They'd violated all 3, multiple times, with documentation. At 10 a.m., I called my HR director into my office. Her name was Monica, and she'd been with me for 7 years. Professional, discreet, someone who understood that emotions and business had to stay separate. I handed her the file without preamble. She opened it slowly, her expression shifting from curious to serious as she read. When she finished, she looked up at me. Her voice was careful. "This involves your husband, I know," I said. "That's why I'm bringing it to you. I need this handled by the book. No shortcuts, no favors." She nodded. "Understood. What do you want me to do?" "Follow protocol. Investigate, document. If the evidence supports termination, then terminate." She hesitated. "Both of them?" "If the evidence supports it, yes." She left with the file. I sat there alone, hands folded on my desk, waiting. The hard part wasn't what I'd done. It was what came next. Waiting for the dominoes to fall. Watching people I'd trusted prove exactly who they were. By mid-afternoon, Monica returned. The investigation didn't take long. Everything I'd found was verified. She'd interviewed 2 other employees who'd noticed the relationship, though no one had reported it. She'd reviewed the expense reports, cross-referenced them with client records. None of the dinners they'd claimed were business-related had involved actual clients. It was airtight. "We'll issue termination letters today," Monica said. "Both of them will be escorted out by end of business." "Do you want to be notified when it happens?" "No," I said, "just handle it." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened." I didn't respond. Sorry didn't undo anything, it just filled space. I stayed in my office the rest of the day. I didn't watch, I didn't need to. At 4:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. The message was short, frantic. "What the hell did you do?" I stared at the screen. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about him, about us, about feelings. He didn't understand that the moment he used company resources to build a relationship with someone on company time, it stopped being personal. It became business. And I'd always been good at business. I didn't reply. 20 minutes later, another message. This one from Jessica. It was longer, angrier. She called me vindictive. She said I was using my power to punish her for something that had nothing to do with work. She said I'd regret this, that she'd take legal action, that everyone would know what kind of person I really was. I almost laughed. She still thought this was about emotion, about jealousy. She had no idea that everything I'd done was defensible in court, that I had documentation, policies, witnesses, that her threats meant nothing because she'd handed me every piece of evidence I needed. I turned my phone off. That evening, I drove home the long way. I stopped at a park I hadn't visited in years and sat on a bench near the water. The sun was setting, painting everything orange and soft. I thought about the version of myself from 6 months ago, the one who'd believed in the life I was living. She felt distant now, not gone, just smaller. When I finally got home, Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. The house was dark. I walked through each room slowly, turning on lights, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in months. The space felt different, lighter, like something I'd been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down. My phone stayed off. I made dinner for one. I ate slowly. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. Because some things aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to be released. Daniel came back 3 days later, not to apologize, not to explain, to negotiate. He let himself in with the key he still had, walking through the door like he'd just been away on a trip. I was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, a book open on my lap that I hadn't been reading. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You didn't have to destroy her career," he said. That's how he started. Not with acknowledgement, not with accountability, with blame. I closed the book slowly and looked at him. "I didn't destroy anything. She did that herself," he scoffed. "You fired her out of spite. You know that's not what happened." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "She lost everything because of you, her job, her reputation. She can't even get a reference now." I stayed calm. "She lost her job because she violated company policy. Multiple times. The same policy every employee signs when they're hired." He shook his head like I was being unreasonable. "This is about us. About me. You're punishing her to hurt me." I set the tea down carefully. "This stopped being about us the moment you used company resources to carry on an affair. You falsified expense reports. You lied to clients. You put the business at risk. That's not personal. That's professional." And she knew better. He stared at me, breathing hard, trying to find an angle that would work. When he realized there wasn't one, his tone shifted. "Fine. Then let's talk about the house. About what I'm entitled to." There it was. The real reason he'd come back, not remorse. Strategy. I leaned back in my chair. "You're not entitled to the house. I bought it before we were married. It's in my name." His expression faltered. "We can split assets. I contributed." "With what?" I asked. "The salary you earned working at my company, the bonuses I approved." "The car I co-signed for?" He didn't answer. "You're really going to do this," he said quietly. "You're going to take everything." I stood up, meeting his eyes for the first time since he'd walked in. "I'm not taking anything. I'm keeping what was always mine." "You're the one who walked away. You just didn't think there'd be consequences." He left without another word. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed felt final. I didn't hear from Jessica again, not directly, but I heard about her. Through colleagues, through industry circles. She tried to find another position in the same field. It didn't go well. When potential employers called for references, they got the truth. Professional misconduct, policy violations, terminated for cause. Her name, once rising, became cautious. A question mark. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't take pleasure in watching someone's career stall, but I also didn't feel guilty. She'd made choices. So had Daniel. And choices I'd learned had weight. The divorce moved quickly. No drawn-out battles. No courtroom drama. Daniel's lawyer reviewed the prenup I'd insisted on years ago, the one he'd signed without reading carefully because he'd been so certain we'd never need it. It was airtight. He got what he'd brought into the marriage, nothing more. When the papers were finalized, I didn't feel relief or sadness. I felt steady, like I'd been walking uphill for years and had finally reached level ground. The company kept running. Clients stayed. Employees performed. No one outside a small circle ever knew the details. Professionally, nothing changed. Personally, everything did. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me. I stopped attending events out of obligation. I let relationships that only worked when I stayed quiet fade naturally. I remembered something my mother told me once, years ago, when I was younger and still learning how the world worked. She said people will take as much as you're willing to give, and they'll rarely stop on their own. For a long time, I thought generosity meant endless availability. That love meant enduring without limits. I was wrong. Real strength isn't in how much you can tolerate. It's in knowing when to stop tolerating altogether. Some nights I still think about that text. The one that called me pathetic. The one that assumed I was small, breakable. I think about how much power we give people when we stay silent. How much we take back when we finally speak. Jessica thought she knew me. Daniel thought he knew me. They both mistook quietness for weakness. They learned the difference too late. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe for more real stories about betrayal, boundaries, and the kind of justice that doesn't need to be loud to be devastating. Because the truth is, some battles aren't won with shouting. They're won with strategy. And I've always been very, very good at strategy.